And this is the case with Google in general and AI, is that these things are marketed as this is going to make you smarter. No, they're not. It does not give you more knowledge. It does not make you smarter. It replaces your intelligence with a machine.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Aboud, and I am here with the core four. It's been a while. Paul, you've been out. Mm-hmm. We've had guests. It's been...
I don't know what y'all have done while I've been gone, so it's good to be back, though.
It's all been good.
You haven't listened?
No, I have not.
Well,
wow.
You should.
Dedication.
Or lack thereov.
I thought he was in the Dominican Republic on the beach listening to the pod.
That's what
you do when you're on a beach, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Did you read anything while you were on the beach?
I did.
Okay.
I attempted to read Wolf Hall and tossed it after 200 pages. And which I know Tanya disagrees with me, but
I do totally disagree.
I actually enjoyed the story. I could not stand the writing. And so that was my problem. And I read The Comedians by Graham Greene.
Are you going to say what's wrong with the writing?
It is stream of consciousness style writing.
I think it's brilliant.
I think what she wants you to do is feel like you're in Cromwell's head.
Yes.
But that kind of writing, it's very hard for me to stomach because you can do it.
How much have you read?
Not much.
Not 200 pages.
When I got into it a little bit, I kind of started to notice that because I was talking earlier about how good historical fiction is articulating things in the way that a person of that time would do it. But as the book goes on, it does get into that kind of more modern, self-reflective kind of thinking, which is that's the way we think now, but that's increasingly rare as you go earlier in history.
You need to keep reading.
Yeah.
Well, I thought 200 pages was a really good
I do
try.
too. I don't think you would like it any better 300 pages later.
Okay.
So I do think you made the right decision for yourself. But I disagree. I do think it was brilliantly written, and I do feel like I was in Cromwell's head.
Have you finished it?
Yes.
You did?
I did finish it, and now I'm reading. So I was going to move on to Bring Up the Bodies and just finish it. But
is that the sequel?
It's a trilogy, and
okay.
that's the second book. That's the one where Anne Boleyn loses her head. So it's, you always know what's going to happen. I mean, you know that the whole trilogy is going to end with Cromwell's execution. So there aren't really any surprises because it's history. But I started reading instead. The last time we had a collaboration meeting with the 6th grade teachers, Jessica Watson told me I had to read Anne Bronte's The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, I think is the name of the book. I just started it this morning, and she said it was brilliant and that she wanted to hear on the Classical Etc. podcast that I was reading that book. So I thought, I better go ahead and read that now before our next collaboration meeting.
Jessica, this is for you.
So we'll see. But she said, she's like the Bronte sister nobody ever talks about, nobody ever hears of. But she thought it was brilliantly written. So I'm really anxious to get into it. And I bought a beautiful one. But it needs to be beautiful. Have you seen those Chiltern classics that are hardback and they've got embossed flowers all over them?
I have a couple of those. Yes,
that's what I bought it in that. So even if it's not good, maybe you should have Wolf Hall with embossed flowers.
That will make it better.
But I want to say, just when it comes to historical fiction, that being in the narrator's head, I think actually gives a sense of that it's more historical than it is, and that was something that also I wasn't loving because I was constantly trying to help remind myself this is a novel and a lot of this stuff we don't know, but just naturally I was having to interpret it as this is in fact what happened. And so that's just another reason that I was put off by it.
Yeah, I have challenged audiences before to find any book where the character is talking to himself before Hamlet.
Before Hamlet.
You think that was a turning point?
I think that was a turning point.
Interesting.
It could have been.
We could throw that out to the listeners.
Yeah.
You tell us. Do you know? That's interesting. How about you, Martin?
I'm writing an article on Chesterton for our Meliora journal for Memoria College.
.org.
And
Sorry.
You're not paying attention.
No, I'm not. I had this tooth extracted yesterday, and I'm not myself, and it hurts to smile. So I'm just going to look really grim today.
But I'm reading The Ball and the Cross by Chesterton again, which is a story about a Catholic and an atheist who the Catholic comes into town, and this atheist has this little shop, and it's atheist books, and so the Catholic breaks the window, and it starts a sword fight, and so the whole story is about the sword fight between the Catholic and the atheist, and it's representative of, because the atheist is this real rationalist, and the Catholic is this very, really represents the imagination, and the whole story is these two guys fighting. And everyone thinks they're crazy to be fighting about what they're fighting about, religion. Why would anyone fight about that? And they end up at the end of the book in an insane asylum. But it's the only place in the whole country that is where the people are actually sane.
What a twist!
That feels very Chestertonian.
It's very Chestertonian, but it's representative of his whole idea of reason and imagination. This sort of dialectic between reason and imagination is the highest level of thinking. So that's kind of what it's about.
Interesting.
Yes.
Spoiler alert.
I'm sure people will be running
Right.
out to buy
If you haven't read it, you don't need to now.
That's funny. Well, before we get to today's discussion, we wanted to cover a listener question. We hope to do that more and more, and we've gotten a lot at our inbox, podcast@memoriapress.com. So let me read you one from Nora and then throw it out to the group. Nora says, "Hello to all of you. I've been a longtime listener of the podcast and appreciate the dialogue and discussion of the truth, goodness, and beauty found within the Western tradition. My question is, how does a parent handle a child or defer a child from becoming elitist in their education and knowledge? My husband and I desire a classical education for our daughter, but have been met with skepticism from our families about our child carrying an elitist attitude. They're concerned our daughter will have more knowledge than other family members and be learning different things than the other cousins. Neither of our families classically educate their children. The concerns stem from a family friend whose child uses their knowledge in disrespectful arguments amongst peers and adults. Any help with how to address this would be greatly appreciated." So she's wondering, how does she protect against an elitist attitude if she goes the route of classically educating her daughter? What do we think about that?
I would like to make a distinction here. There's two things going on here. One, I think she phrased it as the family is afraid of their child knowing more than the other cousins.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the attitude question, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so fundamentally, I think when it comes to knowledge, and I think this is what we're talking about today on the podcast, right? Knowledge is important. Knowledge matters, right? So I think one ought not to say, well, because other people don't know these things, well, then I shouldn't teach my child those things. No, it's objectively a good thing for your child to know as much as your child can know.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question becomes the attitude question. And I think it's a fair criticism. I mean, when Sarah and I were dating, and she was like, "What do you do?" And she starts, and then she started traveling with me after we got married. She's like, "Everybody you hang out with is arrogant."
Yeah.
That's how she perceived it, right? So it can very much come across that way, and that I think is a work of humility that we all. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you have the knowledge or not. I mean, we all tend towards pride, and that's a character development,
Right, which is part of classical education, is we are training character, and we certainly wouldn't want our students to run around, especially in arguments with adults,
I saw that.
acting like they know more than the adults know. a nice healthy argument is one thing, but children don't know how to do that. And we don't encourage that even, within our classrooms with young students, because they don't have the capability. They don't have the
discernment.
Discretion. The discernment is the word I was looking for, not discretion. To be able to do that and do it politely and respectfully. But as far as the elitist question, and I struggled with that, and I've told this story before about, my kids in Sunday school knowing more than anybody else, and it was embarrassing to me whenever they would play a game. But the fact is, the knowledge that we gave our children, that we are giving children today, is the education that everybody used to have, not even that long ago. Everybody had it. And so it's the fact that we've let it go by the wayside doesn't mean that we need, that's what we're doing, is trying to bring it back so that everybody does have that education again. So we would prefer everybody having what could be considered an elitist education. But it's not really. It's core knowledge that everybody should have.
Invite the cousins.
To classically educate. That's right.
I think what she really means by elitism is arrogance. I'm assuming that's what she's talking about.
That's what, when she talks about the way the other child, family friend interacts, that's what it sounds like.
And if you criticize somebody who is more knowledgeable than you, isn't that a form of elitism and arrogance? A lot of most ignorant people I know look down on people who are learned.
Yeah, anybody can be proud, regardless of how much knowledge you have.
I know. So it's not a matter of knowing more being elitist or arrogant. And in fact, this is Plato's whole shtick, right? Is knowing what you don't know, is knowing your ignorance. And so I think, if you're teaching kids classical education or any other education properly, you're educating them in their own ignorance. You need to be aware. And the more, I know in my life, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. You just keep pushing the boundaries as you get more and more knowledge. The boundaries of what you don't know increase, and to me it's dispiriting sometimes to think.
Right, There's not enough
I've lived
time.
my whole life, and in one sense, I guess I know a lot, but in another sense, gosh, I wish I had 50 lifetimes to learn all the stuff that's worth learning. And so I think, if somebody's looking down on your child for knowing a lot, I think that's a sort of an arrogance.
And it could be a feeling threatened by that.
That could be what it is. But again, it's up to the attitude of your child. One of the things you should know as part of any education, classical or not, is humility. And examples of it. And if your child has read stories, literature where humility is a virtue and it's on display in the characters in the story, they're not going to be proud, hopefully. I don't think the amount of knowledge you have and the amount of pride you have anything to do with each other. I think you find pride and arrogance in ignorant people just as much as you find it in knowledgeable people. So I just don't see that as an argument against having more knowledge.
But in this case, I would invite the aunts and uncles and the grandparents to say, look, like, you're right. We're not in a vacuum. Like, I can't educate my child solely by myself and that be their only influence. And so, like, this as a family, we're raising up all of these children. And so if you see my child being arrogant towards your children, I want to know about it. I want to step in and correct that behavior. I want you to step in and correct that behavior. I mean, because that's something that as a broader family, it's not just, my child's going to come in and be who they're going to be and not expect that another adult can correct them when they see that, and that's the way you form virtue, right? Because when an older, wiser person sees a younger person not doing what they ought to, you step in and you go, don't do it that way. You need to do it this way. Here's why, you walk them through it.
But you were talking earlier about how kids, in the school here, in a lot of the other educators I know, they don't realize that it's any different anywhere else. That's what you were saying. I mean, they just think that's normal. My grandchildren, 2 of which are here now, they don't know that they know any more than a
No,
kid who
but
goes
that's
to another.
all of your grandchildren are being educated classically. In this situation, one child is being educated classically.
Oh,
So there is
yeah.
a difference, and
Yeah.
the adults are seeing it. And I think that sometimes you have to do what you know is best for your family and go against the grain. And I think, just it used to be, I don't know that my family and friends were concerned about the education I was giving my children, which was so totally different than anything they'd ever thought about before, or even that I had ever thought about before. But they were also, I think, pretty appalled that I was homeschooling. And at least now, you don't, now homeschooling has come so far so quickly that you don't have to deal with that as much. So now,
and the problem is at least as far as perception goes, was exactly the opposite. I mean, when we
Right.
decided to homeschool, my mother-in-law had a very bad reaction to this because my wife came from a family of teachers several generations back, and this was just. I think they were appalled, and they were appalled not because they thought that our children would be arrogant or elitist, because they thought they wouldn't get to know anything because it was homeschooling.
That's
How
right.
do you do that?
That's right.
So there's lots of reasons.
Yes, there are many reasons, and I do think that it is what we are doing is different, which is why, like when we take the ITBS test here, we don't take the social studies or the science portion of that test because we know we're doing things differently. We know that while everybody else is studying America, our kids are in ancient Greece or ancient Rome and just they're not studying sociology. They're not studying the typical things that are part of education today. So we are doing things differently, but I think we have to own that. And be confident in it, and just know that we're doing the very best that we can for our children. But it's not necessarily easy.
No, but I appreciate Nora's vulnerability in asking a really good question, because hopefully it shows that you just have to wrestle through some of these things as you start and all the way along, and you're not alone.
That's right. No.
From a generation before you that did it,
yes.
maybe it was a different problem, but it was still resistance that you experienced. And anyway, yeah. So I appreciate her question. And
yeah, it was a good question.
Yeah, it was. And it ties into today's topic. We're going to talk about knowledge. And Martin, I want to start with you because what I want from you, Martin, is
knowledge. She knows where to find it, apparently.
Yes, there's a typo right here.
No. Have to answer that later.
I guess so.
I want to start with you because I want you to situate us in this conversation. When we say we're going to talk about knowledge, are we talking about skill building? Are we talking about fact gathering? Are we talking about intellect? What are we talking about?
Well, I assumed what we were talking about was content knowledge.
Content knowledge.
Right.
Okay.
You mentioned skills, and one of the things, the place I go to read about the importance of knowledge in education is E.D. Hirsch Jr. I have the book here, Why Knowledge Matters. which is, I think, the best book on this issue of the importance of knowledge. Because one of the things he points out, you mentioned skills, is that we tend to think that we can teach skills to children in our schools in some kind of content vacuum. And one of the contributions to the debate that he has made is that he points out that if you try to do that, if you try to do skills outside of knowledge, you're not going to get very far. Because in a sense, a wide set of knowledge it helps even in skills. And they've done tests on this. They have tests where a reading test, and all the examples are baseball. I'm just making this up, but this is the kinds of studies they've done. And they will take a group of really good readers and a cohort of not good readers who know baseball. And guess who does better on the reading skills test? The ones who know the baseball. That's how important content is, even to skills. And so, and we don't realize that. We go along in all of our education policies thinking that we can do skills without knowledge, and vocabulary knowledge. It's where it starts. Hirsch says it starts with vocabulary knowledge. What words mean, because you can have had phonics, and you can decode words and all that kind of thing. But if you get to a word that you don't know, gone. You can't understand the passage, particularly if it's an important part of the sentence. So it's an important thing, not just in virtue of knowledge itself, but a wide body of knowledge helps you in every other aspect of education, skills and whatever else.
But now you can Google the
and he's got a whole section in there called the look it up fallacy. And he points out that, that whole process of looking something up, he says it's an activity in which the rich get richer. In other words, you can find things much more easily if you know what your question is, and you have to have a bit of knowledge already to phrase the question right to get what you need to get, right? That sort of thing.
And it's such a time sucker.
Oh, it is.
If you have to look everything up.
Yeah, you look up every word.
Well, I remember as a child trying to learn Latin and watching my sister do her Latin exercises. She was older than I was. And she would sit down with that book and she'd have exercises, and she would literally write out the responses with no hesitation.
Because she knew.
And I'm sitting here going, I know that if I were to do that exercise, I'd have to go look up most of the words, or the form. And I was just impressed because it was in her head, right? And it saved her tons of time because she knew the content.
It seems like there's a long tradition of emphasizing this in classical tradition. Are there any differences between today, the way content is communicated, or the base of knowledge versus what it used to be?
Well, we have demoted content subjects in our curriculum. And part of this comes from the whole testing thing. Hirsch says that about 50% of time that they're spending on test prep in schools, preparing for tests, comes from literature and history. And so we've replaced literature and history in many of our schools with test preparation types of things because, high stakes testing and all this, is a big thing these days. And the time is coming from content subjects. So they're not learning that material.
And so I think what Martin here is talking about is what's happening in the majority of schools today.
Yes.
And whereas from the classical perspective, classical education has always been heavy on content because the division of content and skills is really a fairly recent thing. And so I think what E.D. Hirsch, his solution for it is you need some form of a common knowledge, common facts, common content that everybody is taught. And so then when you're actually, when you, in that case, if you were then to test for skills, you would actually be getting accurate readings on whether those skills are acquired because everybody's got the same content. And so our perspective on that is, well, let's use the Western tradition. That's what our content is. It's what it's historically has been. And it teaches us where we come from.
Yeah, that's really important. And this, ironically, if you remember the Common Core debate about 2010, they called it the Common Core, but there was nothing common about it because, in fact, Hirsch was involved in that because he wanted. This is what his argument is. So he comes up with is the main influence on their literature selections in the Common Core. Well, but then what they did was they kept all the supposedly skill stuff in there, and they made that mandatory, and they made the literature optional.
Yeah.
So of course it never happened, and so everybody's reading different things, and this is why you have Hirsch would really like a national curriculum for that reason, but every time the establishment gets their hands on it, they mess it up. The textbook companies, just write it the way they write. They've always written things, and teachers' colleges keep teaching the garbage they're teaching there, and so all these reform efforts go flat, even though the original idea is not a bad original idea. But there was a friend of mine, Andrew Kern at the Searcy Institute, has always said that the purpose of a classical education is to enable you to get jokes. And I thought, what are you talking about? Well, I finally realized what he was talking about, and it has to do with content. I'm in a class, and this was early on in Highlands history, and we had we were only, I think, can't remember how many days a week we were going at that time. It may have just been 2. I can't remember. We went from 1 to 2 to 3. No. And I had this boy in my class, and he, like most of the kids, were from a homeschooling background. But in their home, they didn't ever listen to the news or any current events, or he didn't know anything outside the books that his mom gave him. And so somebody in the class would make a joke, and all the kids would be laughing, and he'd just be sitting there going, "What? I don't understand. What's so funny?" He literally asked that out loud, and of course,
it makes it funnier.
That wasn't received well in the class. But he did not have the same background knowledge that the other kids in the class had, and so he couldn't even get the jokes. And I finally understood what Andrew Kern was saying in this regard. You have to, even just to get a joke, you have to know what the context is. And if you don't know it, you're kind of the odd person left out. You can't laugh.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder too, I could be wrong about this, but it seems like we're not our goal isn't just to ensure that children know a fact, but that they can also rightly apply the knowledge that they've gained, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, all knowledge is contextual. What Hirsch says is all skills, for example, are domain specific. And every piece of knowledge also has a part, usually, in some subjects more so than other subjects. And so it's not just these little discrete factoids. Knowledge is more than a fact. It's facts in context.
That's helpful.
I just made it up.
I wonder, Martin, if you can talk about the technology. I know technology is really popular in a lot of methodologies for schools, and how does technology help or hurt this effort?
Well, Tanya brought up the Google. You can look things up. But if you get online and you search something, the hardest part about that is knowing what question to ask or what other word is related. For me, I often it's just, I need this, seems like more of a problem these days. I need a word and I know the meaning, but I can't think of the word. And if I know some synonyms, I can get that. But if I don't, I can't. You have to kind of hone in on things if you're having to use Google or something. So technology is great, but I actually think the technology of the old encyclopedias, which was much better than Google, where you just opened up the book and started reading and found something interesting, and you did that repeatedly, and you got this store of knowledge.
But you would also go to one domain Right. And you would read everything about that one thing.
But not in an encyclopedia. It's completely randomized.
Well, no, it's randomized,
Yeah.
but you would read the entire entry. You'd have a
Yes.
long form entry.
Yes.
You'd read that entire
And
entry.
there would be, see also.
Right. And then you could go look at that.
Yes.
But what ends up happening, and I've gone into schools where like you go into the classroom and the majority, maybe the teacher's working with 4 or 5 kids and everybody else is on their iPad. And what do they give them access to? They've given them access to videos and they're all sitting there with their headphones on, or they've given them access, like a library of videos. So they go watch whatever they want to, or they can, they've got digital books that they can go through, or they've got like certain web pages they can go through and browse. Well, and research has been done on this, that like because of how kids are learning to read now on web pages, they're not actually reading deeply. They're reading for keywords. You're just, you're grabbing a few things, then you click on to the next thing. And instead of being something where you're sitting and soaking in it like you would in an encyclopedia, where it's like, if I'm moving on, I'm really moving on. It's just this lightning fast stuff. They're not stopping to think about it all. They're not stopping to assimilate it at all. And they're all doing different things. And so
that was what I was going to say is, again, you're not pursuing that common knowledge that everybody has. Every child is learning something different.
It's super individualized and individualistic. But then and the reason we've gone that direction in a lot of our schools is because we're saying standards are important. So one of the standards we need to have is the ability to find information, to do research. Well, it doesn't matter what it's on. You're just going to throw an iPad in front of you or a computer and say, research, type something in and figure out how it works. Well, if you don't have the content, you're not going to find what you're looking for. There's just too much information.
And it reminds me of the chair of the religion department at Princeton, who I was in a meeting once, and when she said that they can't give students big assignments anymore. They can't give them large reading assignments because they melt down. They are emotionally unable to concentrate for long periods of time. And that is technology that has done that to us.
And plus, because Hirsch points out, he says, instead of being an agent of equality, Google rewards cognitive insiders. It consolidates educational inequality.
Yeah, that was a great point he made, was that the technology allows those people that are already able to do the work to do it faster, but those that can't, it puts them at a greater disadvantage.
Yeah, right. And that's his broader view of knowledge acquisition,
Right.
is that you have children coming from educated homes, and so they come to school with a wide body of background knowledge already. And then you have kids coming from lower socioeconomic situations and so on, and they don't have that background knowledge. And so you've automatically have inequality in your classroom. And then you start giving them reading tests and you see the inequality, but you're not teaching them knowledge, so you can't equate it. Knowledge brings about educational equality.
Right.
And you've just got to make up for those gaps. It's not just a skills gap, it's a knowledge gap.
And it does go back to the fact that everybody used to have a similar education and was taught the same content. Everybody had read the same books, the same literature. And that's just not true anymore. Now it's just whatever the teacher wants to teach. And it's,
Yeah. Well, and I want to go back to the technology question, even though we harp on technology enough. But AI is a problem because AI it's well known that it spits out incorrect answers. And now any search, I'm sure this happened in schools. It's so new that I haven't seen it in a school, but I'm sure student goes in, because it happens to me. I type in something in Google. I've got a question and I've got a whole AI thing at the top that is not always correct. But because I know what I'm looking for, I know to then look at the sources that it's quoting there, to go look at those sources to see if they're reputable. I can find out the truth of something. And so if we're asking students to gain their knowledge from something that is giving them incorrect answers, unreliable answers, then, we thought Wikipedia was bad. AI is even worse.
Yeah, I'm getting old, so I forget things, right? So we were going to do the thing on knowledge. So I got on Google this morning and I Googled, what does Martin Cawthorne say about knowledge? And I got what I thought about knowledge. It was up there. And it was relatively, it was relatively accurate, but only relatively, and there wasn't much on there. But yeah, and the whole, yeah, what does that say about
Oh my
me?
goodness. I told you not to do this.
We're not supposed to make her laugh.
No.
She's have
I
teeth
cannot
extracted.
believe.
So anyway, I had a point with that. Oh, AI, and this is the case with Google in general and AI specifically, is that these things are marketed as this is going to make you smarter. No, they're not. It does not give you more knowledge. It does not make you smarter. It replaces your intelligence with a machine. What a machine thinks in a system.
Momentary convenience that is in the long term detrimental to
That's
you.
right. It enables you to
Especially
get
children.
Right.
Especially children.
Right.
Yeah, so it becomes a crutch that you rely. I do. I mean, I rely on it a lot for things, and I shouldn't. We used to have it, written down in our notebooks and places that we could go back and find it, and people don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
I'm actually finding I'm doing that more for like office tasks, writing it down in a notebook. I used to be able to keep it clean on a computer where it would remind me of certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And now I don't know if it's just I've got too much now on the computer that like the important things, they get written down in a notebook because I know I can go back and I can look at that and I'm not going to have to troll through thousands of files to find
You can
that.
find it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's that's the thing about a curriculum is it's distilled all the content that we as humanity knows, and we've said, here's the important things to teach, as opposed to when that door is wide open, if the door's wide open, if I need to find this one particular thing, it's hard for me to find. But if it's been distilled for me, if here's the important stuff, then I know what to do.
Well, and back to what Tanya was saying, if you go back to the 19th century, there were readers that were very popular, and that's what most schools used. The McGuffey readers or the Baldwin and Bender readers. There was a whole bunch of different ones that they had, and not only were they the same for all the kids in a school who were reading the same readers, but all the readers were similar to each other, and so we had this default national curriculum, this default body of knowledge that everyone learned. And I think everyone learned better because it was common like that. And we've just, one of the things technology's done is completely exploded that. There's now more knowledge. It's more disconnected. It's harder to find. It's a bad situation to be in.
Yeah. But the positive and maybe the practical side of this is there are ways to, even in your own home, like we were helping with Nora and the question she asked, like there are ways to, at least within your family or with one student that you have, you can help them acquire the knowledge, like the facts and context, and learn to apply it over time. Like you're not without resources. Like you can, like what we sell here at Memoria Press or what our children get at our Highlands Latin schools, it is available to you. It's not like,
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, that was a very conscious thing. I think that Cheryl did, and that we've all been working on all over these years. Is it's not just a curriculum with a bunch of stuff in it.
Right.
It's a curriculum with all the things we deem are the most essential.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have everything,
That's right.
but it has the most essential things in it. You got to decide. When you're making a curriculum decision, you got to decide, about what body of knowledge do I want to know?
Right.
And what we emphasized was the body of knowledge that people in the United States, people in the West, thought was important. And that, in fact, is the most common of all the curriculums if you look back historically. And if we want to have some kind of connection with our past, and we want to know what are the greatest of the great books, the best of the good books, with the lower grades. That's what we looked for. That's what we tried to include in the curriculum. The the selections we have for all of our children's literature, it's not everything. There's really good books outside of what we have, but we had to make some selections, and we got what we felt was the best of those that had, that were used over generations and that were appreciated, by children over long periods of time. We tried to put that in there, and there's some decisions we could have made differently, and it would be just as good. But we tried to make a common curriculum here. So
that's helpful. Well, thank you for our discussion on knowledge. I know I learned a lot. There's some stuff I did not know.
And knowledge talking about knowledge.
I was just going to make a joke about that. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Core 4. And thank you for joining us as well. We will be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical, Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical, Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.